Staccato signals of constant information, a loose affiliation of millionaires and billionaires and baby. These are the days of miracle and wonder. This is the long distance call.
A loose affiliation of millionaires and billionaires. Yes, that was Paul Simon's song, The Boy in the Bubble. And of course the Bilderberg meetings have been in a bubble for the last 50 years, a bubble of secrecy. We should give thanks to Jim Tucker, the groundbreaking journalist who chronicled the activities of the secretive Bilderberg group, who died in April of this year. That work is now being continued by the likes of Alex Jones of InfoWars, Luke Rudowski of We Are Change, Paul Joseph Watson, David Icke, and, who knows, maybe you who are listening to me now. Before I get on to the main part of this vlog essay, a quick apology to anyone that clicked on this and was expecting to hear a female voice. It is my wife that does most of the vlogging. I'm one of these people that very much wants to make a vlog about issues which concern me. I never seem to have the time. My wife also is very short of time, but somehow she manages by dint of staying up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes to get these videos out. I admire her tremendously. I'd like to tell you about a public meeting that took place in 1890 that became known as the Peterloo Massacre. 60,000 people assembled in St. Peter's Field near Manchester, England, to listen to Henry Hunt, who was known as Orator Hunt. This person was a farmer, a real John Bull type, very much like Alex Jones, hunting, shooting, fishing type, known as a very effective public speaker, who was invited by the Manchester Patriotic Union Society, who were a group of constitutionalists, not radicals. The government and establishment were out of control at the time. There was much financial distress caused, in my view, by the effect of the Enclosure Act, which I shall tell you about in a moment, and in particular to listen to Henry Hunt talking about the abuses of the current political system, which included 6 Acts of Parliament, suspending habeas corpus, the Seditious Libel Act, which meant there was no freedom of speech, the Treasonable Practices Act, the Seditious Meetings Act, really ferocious repression of any form of free speech, including, you may not be surprised to hear, the attempt to muzzle the press by putting on a very heavy tax on newspapers. Before I describe what happened on that day, I need to tell you about the Enclosure Acts. This was a change to the previous system of farming that had been in place since medieval times, whereby the ordinary population of the country sustained themselves by farming land which was in general held in common, but in particular each family in a particular locality farmed a particular portion of that common land. However, from 1760, the process took place between 1760 and 1830, wealthy individuals could apply to Parliament through a private act of Parliament to basically privatize these pieces of land that had hitherto been held in common and literally enclose them. The subsistence farmers were thrown off these lands, and the system had no doubt seen as a great merit that these subsistence farmers were now in need of work and made very cheap labourers. In fact, you could expect, if you were a paid labourer, to work from dawn to dusk throughout the year for wages which would eventually starve you, and I see no difference between these farm labourers of the time and American slaves. Here is an interesting graph which appears in this book, showing just one of the effects of the Enclosure Acts. Around about the time in which this meeting took place, the private bills that were placed before Parliament to be rubber-stamped by the corrupt politicians of the time were running at well over 100 acts per year. That means 100 communities devastated by the loss of the farmland that had sustained them for centuries. If you look at the top line, you will see that not only did these people lose their land, the wheat that was necessary for them to feed themselves rose in price. And the graph shows quite clearly that the Enclosure Acts caused wheat prices to skyrocket. So not only were these self-sufficient farmers suddenly without the means to feed themselves, they also had to find the money to buy wheat, whose prices were shooting up in direct proportion to the amount of land being confiscated by the wealthy. Little wonder, therefore, that there was a lot of discontent amongst the public. My guess at this point is that you may be asking yourself, if you are British, well, I went to history lessons at school, why don't I know about this? Well, you don't know about this because the UK establishment likes to airbrush uncomfortable facts out of history, and what you are supposed to know is a bunch of fairy stories, a bunch of dates, and to be left with the impression that the UK establishment does not do massacres, does not muzzle the press, does not suppress freedom of speech, does not fling people in prison for no good reason. So please picture, if you will, 60,000 men, women and children dressed in their Sunday best clothes, adhering to the instructions not to bring any arms, peacefully listening to orator Hunt. You recall that I mentioned that the meeting was organised by the Manchester Patriotic Union Society. They had obtained permission for the meeting with the local magistrates. However, the magistrates that were in attendance at the meeting didn't like the look of 60,000 people meeting and listening to Henry Hunt. The magistrates ordered the police to go in and arrest Henry Hunt. The police, however, refused to carry out the magistrates' orders. The magistrates then ordered the military to go in and arrest Henry Hunt. When I say the military, these consisted of two types of regiment. One was the Hussars, who were a cavalry regiment that had not long before fought in the Battle of Waterloo, and the representatives from another regiment, the yeomanry, who were also mounted cavalry, but these were made up of sons of the factory owners, the local landed gentry, people like that. In short, people that employed the sort of person that was at the meeting. On seeing the military approach, everyone linked arms in the crowd, and there was obviously going to be a standoff. The officers of the regular army, the Hussars, ordered their soldiers, their cavalry, to approach the crowd in a manner which would cause the least damage possible, in particular giving instructions to only use their sabres by twisting the sabres round so that it was only the flat part of the sabres that struck people, which would still slice off an ear, but at least some attempt was made at morality at that point. However, the sons of the farmers and the mill owners galloped at the crowd using these vicious sabres in the way that they were intended. There were several hundred casualties, and one thing that the people of this era did was keep good records so that we know every single casualty and injury that occurred, which included heavily pregnant women and children. Although I would love to continue talking to you about the events surrounding the Peterloo Massacre, Henry Hunt's subsequent trial and imprisonment, and how he continued to fight for freedom of speech, Thomas Paine and the rights of man, this whole story is absolutely fascinating. I do have to return to Bilderberg, which is the challenge which history has given the current generations. If you have ever felt that you should do something about the current political situation, now is the time. This is a pivotal moment where the mainstream prostitute media have been shamed into admitting that these meetings go on, but they have yet to gauge the interest that the general public has in the subject by going to Watford and literally being counted, because that is exactly what the establishment will do. They will take a head count of people present, and factoring in the general apathy, they will use the number of people turning up to Watford to gauge the strength of opinion and interest. You won't just be counted as one person. The establishment know how the public tends to let things slide. I won't call it apathy, because it's not apathy, it's just the challenges of ordinary day-to-day living by ordinary people. But given that that is taken into account by the establishment, if you turn up to Watford, you will not be just counted as one person. Your presence will signify a multiplier of 100, of 1,000, tens of thousands of people who are very close to turning up. And you are not being asked to face a cavalry force. The worst that you will have to face will be an irritated copper who thinks that you're insane, whereas of course he's insane if he doesn't realize that what's going on right now within the walls of the Grove Hotel affect all public workers, including the police, so that if he doesn't watch out, pretty soon he's going to have someone from G4S as his line manager. So please, turn up, be counted, and enjoy.